was praying yesterday evening about an hour before sundown. I was praying about today's sermon, and I said, Lord, I need a telescope. My telescope's still in storage down in Georgia, and I said, I need a telescope. And so I prayed about it, and immediately came to mind before the prayer was over, I wonder if there's one in the Pathfinder room. So I was carrying it around the hall this morning, and one of the Pathfinders says, oh, that came out of the Pathfinder room. I'm like, I'm in the Pathfinder room as much as they are. Whew. Didn't see it. So I came over to the church, found the key to get into the Pathfinder room, and I don't have darkness to blame. I turned on all the lights and walked right past this into the storage closet. They really cleaned that up. It's really nice and neat in there. And I looked all around the storage closet. I found all kinds of neat Pathfinder-y things. But I was so disappointed because there was no telescope. And I shut the door and looked. And I'm like, oh. I walked right past it into there. So I stole it. Borrowed it without permission. I'll return it one day. But what's amazing is this is not just a telescope. This is one exactly like the story's about that I received as a kid when I was, probably 10 years old for Christmas. My parents got me this telescope exactly. And I was like, God, thank you so much. And I called my wife and I said, I'm so happy. She's down in Georgia too. And I was like, I'm so happy God answered my prayer. And the last time I remember using the telescope was in our last house down in Loganville, Georgia. And it was on a Monday evening, December 21, 2020. Just after sunset. And I was looking at what people were calling, they said, you've got to go out and look. It's the Christmas star. I'm like, okay, I'll go out and take a look. It appeared to be a new star in the sky. It had not been there before, at least for a long time. And it looked like a star from our perspective here on Earth. But really, it was two planets, Jupiter and Saturn, that were side by side, so it looked like one big new star. And those had not appeared that close since July 16, 1623. I was barely alive then. And it's doubtful that anyone observed it because it was too close to the glare of the setting sun and just on the edge of the horizon. They actually appeared even closer than this in the early morning hours of March 15, 1226, nearly 800 years ago. That was in the heart of the Middle Ages. So on that Monday night, nearly 5 years ago, my family got out to witness this rare event. I grabbed my trusty little telescope from childhood. My phone could probably zoom in on it better now, but that's what I had. And it was just powerful enough to see Jupiter on the left and Saturn with its rings on the right. Okay, looked at that. Pretty cool. We saw it. What else can we see? Well, we found Mars, and we took a look at the craters on the moon, and we saw a satellite pass over, which is something a bit hard to see in the suburbs of Atlanta with all their light pollution. So we had a good time that evening. People have enjoyed stargazing since time began. Unfortunately, it looks like those stars are going to have more competition than just light pollution. Have you heard? Companies are now trying to work out how to position satellites in a way to make them spell out things. Celestial billboards in the sky. I hope that's never allowed. Just think about the confusion this would have caused the wise men of Matthew 2 as they followed a strange new star. Is that a star? Or is that a satellite falling out of orbit from the drink Coca-Cola sign or Babylonia Cola, whatever they had back then. How confusing the signs would become. Look at Matthew chapter 2. Matthew 2, verse 1. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, are you enjoying these Christmas sermons while it's still kind of warmish outside? Okay. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. Now, this is a painfully brief description of the Magi and leaves more questions than answers. The word magician comes from magi. If you check for synonyms of the word magician in your computer, you'll come up with words like conjurer, illusionist, necromancer, sorcerer, and wizard. Now, some of these are worse than others, but they're not synonymous with the word magi in the context of Matthew 2. If one could have checked their computer in the day of Christ's birth for synonyms for magician, they would have come up with words like wise man, counselor, philosopher, and ambassador. So, where do we get the word king for these men? You know, we three kings of Orient are. This comes from the prophecy in Isaiah 60, which Ashton read for us. Isaiah 61:3 says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. See, darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness is over the peoples. But the Lord rises upon you, and his glory appears over you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn." Okay. More questions. So why do we say that there were three of these men? Did you know the Bible never says there were three wise men? I've read it. It's not there. I've read the Spirit of Prophecy. It's not there. Why do we say there's three? The only thing I can come up with, there are three types of gifts that were brought: gold, frankincense, myrrh. We do know that there was more than one, because the Bible uses the plural. So there were at least two wise men. My guess is there was a bunch of them because it was enough to stir things up in Jerusalem, not just a couple of guys walking through the gates. Where did they come from? The Bible simply says the east. This could mean the lands of Arabia, Syria, Mesopotamia, etc., the same land from which Balaam came, who is also considered a magi. You remember we talked about him a few weeks ago. It's also interesting that they knew the Hebrew scriptures. They seem to have been studying the books of Daniel and Numbers from the things that they said. Next question. How would they have access to these books? Remember those Jews who did not return from Babylonian captivity in the 6th century BC? They're still scattered in communities throughout the Near East and the Mediterranean world. And since the 2nd century BC, these scattered Jews had a Greek translation of the scriptures called, does anybody know? I heard it. All the way back from Pastor Dawson. The Septuagint. Greek was then similar to English today. Well, you say, wait a minute, the Hebrew was what the Old Testament was written in. Yeah, but this is the first translation of the Old Testament. And it was translated into Greek down in Egypt and spread through the world. And they spoke Greek like we speak English. Almost anywhere in the world you go, somebody speaks English. Unless you're way out in the bush of Africa. And then you use sign language and you make it up as you go. But it's fairly universal around the globe. The Septuagint had spread around. And as we look at the scriptures and the way that Jesus quoted scripture, it sounds like he's quoting this rather than the Hebrew. So he was using a translation of the Bible. And so The scriptures and the gospel indicate the Septuagint was pretty widespread. So this is where they would have gotten it. Balaam evidently had copies of this. He knew what was going on in the Hebrew world. Of special significance to the astrological interest of the Magi would have been the words of another Gentile Magi, Balaam. You know, that guy that spent too much time talking with donkeys. But people were not ignorant, even though they did not have the internet. They knew what was going on around the world. And people have always been that way. They know what's going on somewhere else. I remember before cell phones had come to Africa, this was just before we got there, one of the staff at Maxwell Academy had car trouble 2 countries away. And word of his car trouble arrived back at campus before he did. Just word of mouth spreading. By the way, so-and-so's going to be late. People could communicate. Numbers 24:17 is actually part of the 4th prophecy of Balaam as he tried to curse Israel for King Balak. You remember this from a few weeks ago. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. This very text was being interpreted by many Jews about the time of Christ's birth as the prediction of the coming Messiah. That specific expectation led to a widespread belief in the Roman Empire that a world ruler was going to arise out of Palestine. Other people were expecting this than just the Jews. The Roman historian Suetonius, around the year AD 100, wrote, "There had spread over all the Orient an old and established belief that it was fated at the time for men coming from Judea to rule the world." Okay, people were talking, somebody from Judea is going to rule the world. He wasn't the only one. Tacitus, another Roman historian from that time, wrote, "There is a firm persuasion that at this very time the East was to grow powerful and rulers coming from Judea were to acquire universal empire." Can you imagine Romans predicting the Jews were going to take over the world? With these thoughts in mind, it should not seem too unusual that the Magi followed the star in their search for the one who had been born King of the Jews. Who's going to rule our empire? In addition to this information, we should keep in mind the possibility that the God who warned the Magi in a dream not to go back to Herod may also have given them dreams concerning the star and its significance before they began their search. We don't know. So the important point is, these wise men stepped out in faith, left everything to find Jesus. They left their homes, their families, their work. They took their time, their talents, their treasures, and made an effort to follow the guidance of the Holy Spirit in their lives. Just what God asks of you and me. They made an incredible journey following a new star in the dark in order to find the light. So, look at Matthew 2. Start with verse 1 again. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him." Why would pagans want to worship a Jewish king? Well, it often happens. The prediction is he's going to rule us. Let's get on his good side to start with. And I hope he'll like us. And that the family will remember us. But why did the star lead them to Jerusalem when Jesus was born in Bethlehem? Have you ever wondered that? Was it to announce Christ's birth? Was it another chance for the Jews to accept Jesus? The leaders were not ignorant. They knew the scriptures. They were aware of Zechariah's vision that we talked about last time. They knew this stuff was going on. They had knowledge of Simeon's prophecy. They had heard the shepherd's report. They had seen the star in the sky. Now these pagan wise men show up later, and that's more evidence. They're asking a very uncomfortable question. Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? Can you hear the confusion and disappointment in their voices as they ask this question? Why does everyone seem so indifferent? Pretty sad, isn't it? Would we call this a Laodicean attitude? So was the church Laodicean before the first coming? Just like it is to be before the second coming. That's the way it appears. They knew he was coming. They had all the predictions, all the signs. So what? It'll happen next year or the year after, maybe. So indifferent. There should have been celebrations in Jerusalem. This was a center of Hebrew worship. Where's the pomp? Where's the circumstance? Whatever that means. Where are the parades? Where are the voices singing? Can't someone at least give us the address of the palace this new king's living in? Well, there wasn't total indifference. Look at verse 3. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled. Being troubled is not indifference. He's troubled. Are you troubled about the second coming? Okay, here's what's even worse. And all Jerusalem with him. Okay, they had all heard from these wise men. They knew what was going on. Jerusalem was not some huge city that we think of today. These guys walked through the gates. People, ooh, who's this? What are they here for? So Herod is troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. This is one of the saddest verses in the Bible. Not just King Herod had heard the news of the wise men, but all Jerusalem. Not just King Herod was troubled, but all of Jerusalem. Another translation says that King Herod was disturbed. Well, King Herod was indeed disturbed in more ways than one. He was downright paranoid. Any king would have been disturbed by the report that a child who was going to occupy his throne had been born. But Herod had more reasons to be upset than most. For one thing, Herod the Great was not even Jewish by birth. He was Idumean. He was an Edomite. His Gentile blood, of course, made Herod suspect in the eyes of the Jews. As we heard from Pastor Dawson a while back, bloodline was everything in their eyes. Herod, however, was a Jew by religious profession and citizenship. Beyond that, Rome had appointed him to be king of the Jews 37 BC. In order to make himself more acceptable to the Jews, Herod married Mariamne, heiress of the Jewish Hasmonean royal line. So at least his wife was Jewish royalty. Another example of Herod's desire to please the Jews was his reconstruction of the temple in Jerusalem. This project finished long after his death and just before its destruction in AD 70. Herod the Great was not all bad. I don't care what you hear. He had a good streak in him. When the Jews were starving in 25 BC, he melted down his own gold to purchase food for them. Okay, that's pretty good. He was also a great builder of cities, public buildings, provided work for a large number of Jews, but nothing he did seemed to help the Jews overcome their animosity towards his bloodline. So Herod is in an unstable political position. His desire for power mixed with his intense insecurity and his extreme paranoia was an explosive combination. Anyone who threatened Herod promptly disappeared. Aristobulus, his brother-in-law, through his marriage to Mariamne, was made high priest. When Herod heard how popular this man had become as the last male of the Hasmonean family, he accidentally drowned in the palace pool by Herod's orders. Then provided a magnificent funeral for him and pretended to weep at his death. Mariamne, Herod's favorite wife, soon shared her brother's fate when Herod suspected her of plotting against him. And that same fear led to the death of her grandfather and 2 of Herod's sons. 5 days before his death, soon after Jesus was born, he had a 3rd son, his oldest and heir, had him executed because that's my heir. I don't want anybody taking my throne, even my own son. Herod deleted anyone who had any royal Hasmonean blood in their veins. Roman Emperor Augustus bitterly claimed it was safer to be Herod's pig than his son. Now here come foreigners claiming to know of a new king. Now you have the mindset of Herod. Verse 4. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, you Bethlehem in the land of Judah are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will be shepherd of my people Israel. See, they're not ignorant. They know the scriptures backwards and forwards. They're waiting for the first coming. But they were not converted. There's a difference between knowledge and conversion. They had knowledge of life, but they did not have life. Bethlehem, as we saw last Sabbath, means house of bread. Well named due to the vast grain fields that surrounded it. We even get that idea from the story of Ruth and Boaz. Well, the bread of life has been born in the house of bread to a hungry nation, and very few want to take a bite. Verse 7. Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me that I may come and worship him. Herod almost told the truth. All you have to do is switch one word from worship to murder. That's what he wanted to do. Verse 9, and when they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. Have you ever rejoiced with exceedingly great joy? Maybe on your wedding day. Maybe at the birth of your first, second, third, seventh child. Do you see the difference in the response? They're not disturbed. They're not indifferent. They're not troubled. They're overjoyed. Verse 11, and when they came into the house. No, wait a minute. Did you notice what this said? When they came to the house. The nativity scenes that we enjoy at Christmas time may not have it quite right. They show shepherds and wise men bowing in the manger. But by the time the Magi arrived, most believe that Jesus would have been between 1 and 2 years old. Jesus had probably learned to walk by then. Thus they were no longer in a barn, but in a house. Remember, Herod wanted the babies killed that were 2 and under for a reason. Verse 11 again, and when they came into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. After finding Jesus, they fall down and worship him. That's a crucial step in Matthew's story, because according to the 10 Commandments, the Jews have been commanded to bow down to no one except to God himself. By emphasizing the Magi bowing down and worshiping in a book written for Jews, Matthew is plainly claiming that Christ is none other than God with us. This claim starts in chapter 1 and continues through the whole book. The Magi's meeting with Jesus did not end with worship. It continued with the presentation of gifts of wealth to him. Worship never takes place just in our minds. It spills over into the real world, into everyday life. Look at verse 12. Then, being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way. Amazing story. Has amazing lessons that I hope we don't miss. Matthew skillfully weaves the story in a way that gives the Jews a lot to think about and gives us a lot to think about as well. We saw the three responses that were evident with the coming of Jesus: worship, rejection, and indifference. Reminds me of God's portrayal of his last day Laodicean church. Hot, cold, lukewarm. Same thing. This theme of responses resurfaces over and over throughout Matthew's gospel. Another theme that we should not miss is that of the Gentile acceptance and adoration of Jesus the King versus Jewish rejection. One would hardly expect that a book written to convince the Jews of Jesus' messiahship to put the Gentile Magi in such a favorable light. In fact, nowhere else in the New Testament does this happen. The way that Matthew presents the Magi is similar to what he did when we saw several Sabbaths ago with the women that were prostitutes and other undesirables that he listed in Jesus' family tree, holding them up because of their faith, holding the Magi up because of their faith. Do we need faith? Matthew presents them as entering the kingdom, while the Jews are left on the outside. This theme is also evident throughout the gospel, a gospel that ends with a command to make disciples of all nations, no matter what, no matter where. But even more disturbing to me is the next theme. That is the idea that Herod is not merely the bad guy in the story, that Herod is me. That's uncomfortable. Herod wanted to be in charge of his own life. Isn't that kind of the way we're born? We want to be in charge of our own lives. We don't want opposition. Is that not what sin is all about? Living for self-interest? That's why the crucifixion of self is so important throughout this whole book of Matthew, as we shall see. No one can serve two masters. I don't want to be Herod the Great. I just want to be a sheep in the pasture of the Good Shepherd. But back to the question, why didn't the star take the wise men to Bethlehem? Why to Jerusalem? Perhaps we can only guess. But what really seems important is this thought. Jerusalem, the center of all the hubbub and activity of the Jews, is not where Jesus was found. Is there an application to our day? To our churches? They too are the center of religious activity and learning, just like Jerusalem, for doing and being, and this is all well and good and vastly important. God commands us, don't forego worshiping with one another. You should fellowship together and so forth. And it is needed. We need our churches for these and many other reasons. But the question is, where is Jesus? One of the church's primary functions is to point the way to Jesus, just as the sanctuary service was supposed to do in Jerusalem. As important as it is to be part of the church, the body of Christ, there's another factor to consider. It is the trip from Jerusalem to Bethlehem to find Jesus. Yes, you say, isn't Jesus here? Yes, he is. He promises to be here when we're here to worship him. But when we go home, does he go with us? Or is he just here? Is he just here, or is he in our heart as well? Maybe you have been a signpost that pointed the way for others to find Jesus, but you never went there yourself. Maybe you've been the bridge that helped others cross, but never crossed yourself, but stayed put where it was comfortable. Because this trip requires daily personal effort and time and commitment to follow the star just a little bit further, to a deeper relationship with Jesus. And that distance may be as far as from your head to your heart. The Jews knew, but faith was gone. It's not so far from your head to your heart, but you have to make that trip. It wasn't far from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, but you have to go that far. If it takes that to find Jesus, it means seeing past our own noses. It means not walking blindly past what is right there in front of you. It means being quiet enough to hear him speak. It means letting go of feelings that limit ourselves and others. Have you forgiven everybody that needs forgiving? And even those that don't know they do or don't think they do. Forgive them anyway. Jesus did. Is that what's stopping you from making that journey? It means letting go of those things, letting go of pride, selfishness, prejudice, and all those other feelings which are nothing more than our own insecurities working against our spiritual growth and the spiritual growth of others. Standing before Herod, the wise men announced that they had come to worship the king. Worship was the reason that they were in Jerusalem. Indeed, there was a great deal of worship happening in Jerusalem, just as there is today. But most of it did not include the worship of Jesus. Our weekly attendance at church says to our neighbors, our friends, our family, and fellow church members that our intention is to worship the King. But if our spiritual journey stops just because we found God's church, then we will become like the people of Jerusalem. If we do not continue to follow that star, we will not find the King. For finding Jesus is a daily journey of drawing closer and closer to him. If our journey stops here and we search no more, we're going to lose sight of the star. It's like what happened on that night with my little telescope. A telescope has two main functions. It magnifies and it focuses. We need to magnify Jesus. But we don't need to just magnify Jesus. We need to focus on Jesus. If we don't magnify but only focus, Jesus remains distant in our sight. If we only magnify and do not focus, Jesus seems near, but his will is blurry to us. We don't see clearly. We need to magnify the Lord through our worship and focus on him as we worship here and at home, as we lift him up to our neighbors. That's magnifying the Lord. And we also need to then focus on him through our study of his word, our prayer life. But that's still not enough. We need to still keep following that star, keep following that leading to wherever it goes. And that was a problem that we had with this telescope on that cold December night, because I would set it up, I would put it at the right best magnification, and I would focus it, and I would say to my wife, "Come look," and she'd say, "I don't see anything." You know why? It moved. Well, if you want to get technical, the earth moved. But they have computers now that guide telescopes so you don't lose sight of it. I don't have a computer. It doesn't guide this thing. I have to continually move it to see that star. And my children would go, "Dad, it moved again." And I'd have to go, and I'd set it, and I'd try to set it on this side of the telescope, so by the time they got to it, it'd be on this side. And they could finally see it. If it didn't do that, if we did not continually focus, magnify, and move, we were in darkness. That's all you could see. Outer space, blackness, nothing. That's what the people of Jerusalem were saying. They had head knowledge but no heart. The people of Jerusalem had lost focus and were trying to magnify what they could no longer see. So when God showed up in the flesh, they were disturbed, indifferent. It's not what we thought it was going to be. It's not what we thought he was going to look like. The signs of the second coming are all around us. Does that make you feel indifferent? Disturbed? Well, that stuff happens all the time, doesn't it? Have you paid attention just the last month? The natural disasters around the world? I used to have an app on an old computer I had in Africa. It showed me how many earthquakes were happening around the world in a day above a certain level on the Richter scale. And back then it was 40 to 50. I hear now it's up to 70 a day. The earth is shaking. The signs of his second coming are here. Are we indifferent? Are we disturbed? Or does it make us feel like the wise men? Overjoyed. Make Jesus the star of your life.